All right, good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Pat Mitchell, a member of the Skoll Foundation Board, and I've been given the opportunity to offer some framing remarks for the conversation that I, like you, am greatly anticipating to hear. We often hear this conversation described as a moment, but it really isn't a moment. It's not even an inflection point necessarily. It's an evolutionary move, and a movement that's been going on for a very long time in this world. A movement that the great Martin Luther King described as bending the arc toward justice, toward a more just and equitable world. And there's no question that where we are now is that arc seems to be bending more profoundly and with more promise than perhaps it has ever bent before, particularly when it comes to full equality, safety, and equal rights for women. So I would offer that as we think about how we ensure that the promise of where we are now becomes sustainable, systemic change, that we think about some of the lessons that we, those of us who were in many other social justice movements, and I can see people in my generation nodding, yes, we have been here before, and yes, we have not made progress before. In fact, and sometimes we have even slipped backward. How do we ensure that that doesn't happen this time? Well, one of the things we learned from the civil rights movement, the global women's movement for rights and equality, is that these kinds of movements do take time, and that there's often not a singular path to systemic change. There's often great differences of opinion on what policies are necessary, how reconciliation comes about, how one moves forward from where we are now, a moment that Tracy Ross Ellis describes as collective fury. We are in the collective fury stage. We have heard the truth telling. But how now do we move to the path forward? And that is what these courageous, brave, frontline activists have launched, and with the help today of a technology platform that has compelled so many more people to listen and to believe the truth-telling, we do stand at a moment of promise that perhaps is greater than we have ever stood before. And leading this conversation is someone who knows a lot about how you dive deeply into change and you look for the collaborations, the unification, the strategies that can lead to that. Lara Setrakian, who founded and is the executive editor of NewsDeeply. So before Lara begins her conversation, a few reminders you're quite used to by now. Silence your cell phones. When you ask questions, hold the mic close and identify yourself. And please fill out the surveys on the session before leaving. Lara?
Thank you. I want to start with a sort of impulse of gratitude and reverence for Pat, who's someone I've looked up to for years. Talk about people who've paved the way for this conversation. To the women on stage who've worked on these issues for decades. To Tarana Burke. And also to all of the women and all the men who've been part of this, who are either taking part in this conversation remotely through the webcast and live streaming, or who will join in and build on what we come up with. And so with gratitude and reverence, we'll start the conversation. Like Pat said, I don't either see this as a Me Too moment. It's more that many of us are just tuning in. We're tuning into what it signifies and what the work is to be done. And for these change agents and many others who've been working on women's advancement, basic safety, this surge of public awareness and the unfolding of silence that we saw last year was a point on the long trail of their experience, a dramatic and positive twist to their own story and the stories of many who came before them. And it was more than just a moment in other ways. For individual women, some of whom spoke up, others who reflected in a quiet way, it was a deep shift, a personal transformation, a transcendence really. Every act of assault is an act of cruelty, and that cruelty leaves a scar, and it leaves you feeling diminished. For women who had ever suffered from assault or abuse of power, last year you finally heard a strong collective voice saying, "No more. What happened to you was not okay. You don't have to swallow the pain. I see it, and you can let it go now." That was a liberating shift for many of us, and it was a shift in our social context, the ambiance within which we exist as women and minorities and people who've experienced discrimination. The headlines of the Me Too movement will surge and sink at times, but we all know that the consequences of it are just beginning to trickle down into individual industries and newsrooms. For those who care to understand and track the consequences, how this changes the way we see ourselves in the world, the contemplative types, and I think that's all of us here in this room, it's an opportunity for societal pattern breaking, to identify the patterns that we ought to break as a society. Global pattern breaking, paradigm shifting, that happens on every industry, every workplace, every home. It's hyper-local, it's very proximate, within the reach and proximity of everyone who can hear this conversation. And it doesn't require changing human nature overnight, that takes time. All it requires are new norms and practices, a check on the worst of human behavior. What we're going to hear from our panelists is how this transformation has played out in the domains that they know so well, where they've been working and making change for years, helping us understand through their earned wisdom what's moving forward exactly, what's moving faster as a result of the Me Too movement, what this awakening looks like on the ground at the frontiers within their own work streams. And I feel very blessed to be part of that conversation. So Amanda, let's start with you. Tell us what you do at RISE and how the Me Too surge was a felt force in that work.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you so much to you, to Skoll for having this conversation, and to everyone who is here today and listening in. I'm the CEO of RISE. We fight for the civil rights of rape survivors. And I came to this work from a very different line of work. I used to be at NASA, my background's in astrophysics, but I needed civil rights. And I put aside, for now, my astronaut dreams to pen my own civil rights into existence. The world is at a moment of reckoning right now. And it has happened because of decades of other people paving the path for this conversation to be had right now. At RISE, we focus on a sexual assault survivor Bill of Rights. And
you don't just focus on it, you crafted it. Give yourself some
thank you.
Fair shaking.
That's very true.
You crafted a Bill of Rights, and that's the basis for so much legislation that's happening now.
Yes.
You were part of that movement before.
Yes. I wrote the Sexual Assault Survivor Bill of Rights, which passed unanimously through the United States Congress and was signed into law by President Obama. It was the 21st bill in U.S. history to pass the law. And since then, I'm so proud to say that the RISE team just passed our 14th law as of last month. Wow. These basic sets of rights help survivors have a little bit more of a fair step in our criminal justice system.
What are some of the rights? Help us understand.
Wonderful question. In my case, how I got to this is because in Massachusetts, where I was raped, they destroy rape kits at 6 months before my law passed. And the double standard is that convicted rapists had the ability to hold on to the evidence for the duration of their conviction, and that in no other crime was evidence destroyed. For instance, murder, another Class A violent felony. And what that meant is for survivors like myself, we had to fight to hold on to our evidence. When I made the decision to go public and tell my story, I heard from survivors across the world. And critically, I heard that they were going through the same thing too. And I realized I had a choice. I could accept the injustice or rewrite the law. One of these things is a lot better than the other, so I decided to rewrite it. So one of the basic rights is the right to have your evidence preserved into the statute of limitations. The other rights include the right to not have to pay for your rape kit. That's the evidence that's collected. It can cost up to $2,000, and creditors will call your home if you can't afford it. A huge disincentive to actually go to the criminal justice system. Another right is the right to have access to your own patient record to figure out if I have HIV/AIDS now, if my perpetrator had given it to me, and the right to be notified of what your rights are. Very, very basic.
And like the Me Too movement, there's a global dimension. Japan
Absolutely.
drafted a law inspired by your work. You're talking to the UN about something there.
Yes.
So what did Me Too do for your work?
It absolutely amplified it. You know, we knew the statistics already. The CDC in 2010 had said that there are 25 million rape survivors in the United States. That's equivalent to the entire population of Texas. And what Me Too did was just show how real this is when everybody had lent their voices to it. And it absolutely demanded that there has to be concrete change. And I'm so proud to say that one of those 14 laws is international. Japan did reform some of their rape laws since 1906. And right now we're working on a United Nations General Assembly resolution to have global leaders prioritize sexual violence as an issue, because we've heard from countries around the world who have asked to do the same thing too.
Mónica, you told me that Me Too gave you more work, but it was good work. It was productive work. What were you doing in the months up to and the years up to the Me Too surge in awareness?
Great, thank you. I'd also like to echo my thanks for the opportunity to be here to speak about Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, which is the first national farmworker women's organization in the United States. I am the daughter and granddaughter of migrant farm workers. My family used to migrate around the United States picking the fruits and vegetables that we eat. And like all of those who are members of Alianza, we come from migrant farm worker families. Many of our members are still working in the fields today. And farm worker women in the United States have historically been invisible. Few people realize that women are working in the fields because only about 25% of the women who are working in agriculture in the US are women. At least that's what the statistics tell us, although I actually think that there are women who aren't being counted, and so that number's higher. And because farmworker women are a minority of the workforce, there are many issues that farmworker women confront that have not been addressed over the years, because the advocacy and the work that was being done from the farmworker rights movement was really focused on sort of the issues that impacted the majority of the workers. The large cases, the issues of pay disparity and other forms of discrimination, pesticides exposure, all of these things that affect women as well. But issues like sexual harassment against farmworker women were not being focused on, even though many people knew that it was happening. And so the data that we have, in the late 1980s when the first study was done on this issue, the women who participated indicated that 9 out of 10 of them saw sexual harassment as a major workplace problem. In the most recent study that was done just 4 years ago, 8 out of 10 farmworker women indicated that sexual harassment was a major problem. And so while we've seen some progress, it's not enough. Sexual harassment's rampant in the fields, and it's being committed by supervisors and bosses and crew leaders. And in the agriculture in the United States, little girls as young as 12 can legally work in the fields. And what we're seeing from our work is that young girls are being specifically recruited and preyed upon by perpetrators. And so in the years leading up to this moment, or in the last few months as we've seen the surge of public disclosures, we were organizing ourselves around the country because, you know, I think for a lot of us from the farmworker community, specifically women who really hold our communities together, we hold our families together, we hold our communities together, and while we've been holding so much to bring our issues forward and to keep our families healthy and safe, we understood that the priorities that impacted our lives were not at the forefront. And so while we followed the rules and played by the guidelines that had been laid out for us and listened and did the good work and worked very hard, we understood that we had to create new rules and new systems, because the rules and the systems and the priorities weren't actually taking farm worker women into account. So about 3 decades ago, farm worker women started organizing for our own rights and to address the injustices that were being committed against women and girls, including sexual violence. And so in organizing, we spent a great deal of time educating farm worker women and girls and other members of our community about our rights, working really hard to help people bring complaints of sexual harassment, supporting survivors as they filed complaints with the police department, which is actually not very common. Very few women who've come forward to report sexual violence against them don't go to the police for help because they're afraid that they will be retaliated against, that they will be deported, because more than half of farm workers in the United States are undocumented. And in addition to filing the complaints and supporting survivors as they came forward for justice through the criminal justice system, we've also supported individuals in filing for special visas where they've been victims of crimes, and we've worked to bring the lawsuits. So our work has been very holistic in the sense of working towards justice for farm worker women. And I think one of the most important things that we have done, in addition to elevating the voices and priorities of farm worker women, is we've worked very closely across movements and across sectors. So for us to do our work effectively, it was not sufficient for us to just work within the labor rights movement. We had to work with the anti-sexual violence movement as well. We had to work with racial justice advocates and survivors and individuals who support survivors across all forms of harassment and discrimination, because farm worker women have many obstacles and barriers that confront them, not just because of their gender, but also because of immigration status and because of their racial background and because of a myriad of other factors. And so for us to be able to effectively make change and win justice for farm worker women in the United States, it really required building a movement that comprised many different individuals in different sectors and movements who could join together with us. Farm worker women in the United States are particularly, by most people, considered powerless. And the reality is that farm worker women in our country and rural women around the world are very powerful, resilient, and resourceful. And we've seen that not just through the work and the movement that we've been building in the United States, but we've seen that globally. And so this particular moment in time where so much focus has been on the violence that's being committed against individuals in the workplace and in other places, we have the great benefit of decades of work on the ground and experience working through systems and through our movements to try to fight for justice. And I think it's that background and experience that has really poised us for this moment to come forward and bring the tools and the knowledge that we have acquired over the years to help affect change right now.
Sohini, you have done amazing things at Breakthrough, with Breakthrough, your predecessor Malika did, creating so much momentum for change through rural communities, media impact, youth engagement, even tracing the individual journeys, like the actual commute of a woman from her home to her workplace to make sure it's discrimination and harassment free. So how did Me Too look within those streams of work? Who did it benefit and how?
So joining my fellow panelists to say thank you for having this conversation. I think it's an important conversation to have in how we look at power structures within our societies going forward. Breakthrough's been working for the last 18 years on transforming gender norms, to a place where both boys and girls and men and women kind of feel that they belong together in the planet. One of the things that we've seen over and over again is the fact that from a very young age, if you are not talking about gender and the kind of discrimination that young girls and women face in our society, women internalize a lot of that. Young girls internalize a lot of that. So till a very later stage where you come in and talk about rights, they don't even realize that this has been a violation of your rights, or this has been a violation of, this is not the normal way of life. Mm-hmm. It's criminal. So, for example, we work across government schools, and there were these 2 girls in a government school who wanted to play Kho-Kho, which is an indigenous Indian game of kind of tag. And they went up to their school principal and said, we want to play, but we don't have a field because the boys have taken over the field. And then the school authorities contacted the local governance head, and he said, no girls are going out of my village to play an outside game, and no fields for girls. these girls went through a gender transformative curriculum that we have, which we work on in schools. They said, please call the head of the village to the school. We want to have a conversation with him. And they sat him down. They said, look, we want to play, It's our right to play. We want, and you are the person who can facilitate that. He was so transformed with these conversations. Not only did he allocate a field near the school for the girls to be able to practice, he accompanies them on away matches now. The girls have won 3 tournaments and have come back. This is the kind of transformation, this is the kind of stories that you can hear if you really work very deeply within that. So the Me Too movement didn't really come, it was a singularly spectacular moment which cuts through all sectors, all industries, all kind of organizations. But it's been building up to this. The women's movement has been building up to this for women to be able to stand up and say Me Too. So it came as something within the framework of, here are a few people who have all the power, all the resources in society, and here are a few people who do not have that power and do not have that resources. It's like a wall of intimidation against which women are, kind of striking their heads 20,000 times before one brick kind of goes away. So that's how we looked at in here. When we are tracing the journey of working women from home to road to factories, where we work with 10,000 women and men to make that journey a much safer and an inclusive one, we are acting against deep-seated patriarchal feelings. Mm-hmm. Moment a woman steps out of home in rural India or even semi-rural India, she's viewed with suspicion, with stigma. Where are you going? Who are you seeing? Why are you taking the same auto driver to work every day? This was a question that was asked by a husband of one of the women that works within that. All of that kind of builds up to this whole thing about this is not an accepted norm. This is not an accepted thing that I should be doing. This is something that is odd. But actually, this is the right of the woman to go out and go out and work in a safe place. So we are now looking at. So we work within a factory system, trying to create a safety net or trying to create a support network for women and men who comprise of supervisors, HR managers, as well as the women themselves, for the women to be able to speak up. Because, even if I am a victim, I don't have the voice to speak up. I don't have the language to speak up. I'm scared that my job is I'm going to be sacked. So, and the Me Too movement really kind of made that clear, because the women who were speaking up were actually very powerful women. Mm-hmm. They were visible women. They were women who have been there, done that, Mm-hmm. There was, and they persisted. But what about that, the undocumented woman? Mm-hmm. What about the poor farmer? What about the Dalit woman who knows that her status, her visa status, her status in society, she might be killed? Where does she get the courage, and where does she get the policies and the frameworks and the enabling ecosystem to be able to stand up and talk? So it was not a surprise to us, but it creates a fabulous moment to address those kind of problems.
Sohini, you told me a few weeks ago that it's time that good men and boys who know this stuff is wrong need to stop being bystanders.
Right.
So what ought they be doing, and how do you communicate that?
So, again, in Breakthrough, we've been working with men and boys for a long time, from Bell Bajao, or Ring the Bell, which was a campaign for men and boys to stand up against violence against women.
Not just that. I'm not going to let anyone here sell themselves short in this hour. It was actually a campaign of TV commercials encouraging men, if they heard their neighbor beating their wife, to go ring the doorbell and walk away just to interrupt the action. So that was very concrete. We're not talking.
It was, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Thank you, and thanks to our founder Malika, whose brainchild this was, and many others.
And what's the version of that now for the Me Too? Well,
so what was so there was this campaign, but when it got translated into actual work on the ground, in one of the sessions we sat boys and girls, 18-year-olds, 19, 20-year-old boys and girls in a village sit-up saying, look, these girls are dropping out of school because of the harassment they face from you. The boys said, we had no idea. We were just being funny. We were just kind of doing something light, We didn't realize that this is a case where there is an actual threat to the life and happiness of the girl who stays next door to me. There has to be, so spaces for creating that kind of a dialogue has to be created. There has to be spaces where people can come together and talk. That is what we are seeing. And that, the idea of creating a safety net of men and women for women to be able to speak up is that. Because if you see, even when you hear about cases within the UN and other places, there were a group of women pushing that other woman to speak about it, to talk about it, to voice, to complain. So there has to be that kind of an action taken. This is what we tell young boys we work with, that don't be a bystander. Speak up, react, do whatever you can to stop it at that point of time. And that has to actually happen in a large scale.
You told me that so many of these women in rural India aren't on Facebook. Imagine what we would have heard if they had been. And Mónica, you said something similar. Of course, you're exposed to so many stories. You found a way to plug them back in to the broader dialogue. So you, who are already representing a group of 18 groups within Alianza, how did you make sure that those voices got heard in the broader debate?
Well, so there are 18 member organizations that are part of Alianza, and we represent the interest of 700,000 farm worker women in the United States. And as I mentioned, have been working on this issue for many years. And I think that the singular moment to sort of introduce the voices of farm worker women into this broader conversation was when we made the decision to write a letter of support and solidarity of the women in the entertainment industry who are coming forward to disclose the sexual violence against them by powerful people in their industry. Our members were having conversations about what we were hearing as people were disclosing, and one of the comments that had been made in the conversations that we were having amongst our members was about how farm worker women live in the shadows of society. Farm worker women are completely invisible, and it is this invisibility that has essentially caused them to feel paralyzed and made them feel unable to come forward. And at the same time, when they were looking at the situation confronting women in the entertainment industry, they were very aware of the fact that women in the entertainment industry live under the bright lights. They live in the spotlight, and it was that spotlight that was really keeping them from coming forward. And so we made the decision to send a message that we stand with the women in the entertainment industry, because what we know from our work is that it's the retaliation that comes following the disclosure that is often most difficult. And our concern was that if we did not share our solidarity and bring our voice of support, that there was a real risk that the women in the entertainment industry might feel like they had to be quiet, because they were starting to receive pushback and backlash. People were saying terrible things to them, like, they have so much privilege, why are they complaining, and why are they talking about these things? And they were judging them. And so we wrote our statement. It was published in Time magazine, and that statement went viral, and that is actually how farm worker women's voices were brought into the conversation globally, not just in the United States, and also the reality facing farm worker women was introduced, because in our letter we talked about how sexual violence is very much a problem for farm worker women. And as I've had many conversations since the letter was published, one of the things that has been repeated to me by people in the entertainment industry and other spaces is that in some ways that letter changed the conversation, because it then allowed people to start looking outward at other industries and how this problem is one that pervades many industries, not just for agriculture or the entertainment industry.
So what have you learned from all the collaborations you've constructed? What does it take to see sustained, organized, collaborative action? And do you think that on this issue, women are so often credited for being more collaborative? Do you sense that here?
I mean, absolutely. I think that one of the most powerful things about what we're seeing right now is that there are women who are working across all lines, across borders, to try to share what we've learned in doing our work over the years, and the best tools and resources that we've developed, as well as having dialogue about how this issue has impacted us. And not just survivors. Many of us in our organization are survivors, but in having conversations with people who are allies and having conversations with people who are family members who want to support us, et cetera, what we're learning is that we need to be talking about how this issue impacts the secondary. survivors, and how this issue also impacts the people who are on the front lines doing the work every day, because it does have a huge emotional toll. And so I think that in having this collaborative relationship and this collaborative movement that's been built, we are now opening space for more conversations that people kind of tucked away. You know, this conversation on sexual violence has been taboo anyway, but now we're finally taking on this taboo issue, and we're figuring out not just what we need to do to provide better care for survivors and to ensure that we're creating a movement that is survivor-led, but also how are we helping to support those on the ground who are doing the work. And you know, one of the big questions that I ask myself all the time as I do this work is, Tarana Burke, the incredible Tarana Burke, gave us a tool that helped so many people around the world finally talk about something that was too difficult to ever utter out loud before. And as we've seen these mass disclosures, not just in the United States, but around the world, I ask myself over and over again that as we are telling people to come forward, we also have to think carefully about what are we asking people to come forward to? What are the systems that need to be fixed? What are the laws that have to be created or amended? What's the kind of training that individuals need to be able to do this work in a victim-centered manner that isn't going to further traumatize individuals who are coming forward? And so I think as we look forward, it's not just about how we embrace those who are bravely coming forward, but how courageous and how bold are we going to be as we think about what it is that we're asking people to come forward to and what it is that we're doing to fix things so that we can actually support people as they begin to heal and move forward.
Amen. Amanda, we've heard about non-disclosure agreements that keep women quiet about abuse, statutes of limitations, and other structures that keep cases from coming to light. What do you think needs to happen in terms of policies and legislation, and what do individual politicians need to be doing?
Well, thank you for asking that question. And thank you, Mónica, for talking about the need for concrete policy change. You know, when people ask me why these civil rights haven't been passed yet, you know, why people destroy kits, the answer isn't easy, because the real answer is that there is embedded sexism within the law, in the structures that hold power and decide what justice is. You know, I often say that the law has a gender. Now, survivors are all different genders, and I want to recognize that. Specifically, what RISE does is we have a concrete, actionable item for politicians and for everyone to get around. Again, each of our 14 laws have passed unanimously, which is a miracle in itself. And the reason for that is because when people start uncovering the just horrific discrimination that survivors do get when they go to institutions and to systems that are meant to help them, it is a no-brainer to change them. Now, I often say this, and I still stand by it. The worst thing that happened to me wasn't being raped. It was being betrayed by a broken criminal justice system. You know, people tell survivors to go to the police, to go to the hospital, and when I went and tried to do that, I was met with something that was way worse. I think the most thing that I'm proud of isn't the fact that I penned my own civil rights into existence, but seeing other survivors be empowered by it. It's that ability to channel and create justice. There's this long tradition of activism, not only in America, but anywhere, of people taking their painful living truths and channeling that into justice. And we're seeing that, and I am so incredibly proud of our organizers who do systemic, relentless organizing day in and day out. It's because their own civil rights are on the line.
So let's recognize that as a column for further elaboration. I mean, there are rules that need to change.
Yeah.
So there's an aspect there. Sohini, you've been, like everyone on this panel, living proof that your movements have staying power. You have kept it going. And over the course of that, you've seen some things change and some things not. I'm talking legislative, structural, right? So in all of the pushes you've made so far, where has it gotten stuck? What has been the barrier to progress?
One of the things, and while we are talking about laws on sexual harassment in the factory system where we work, what we are seeing is that, and at the risk of ruffling feathers or raising hackles, putting lawyers and human resource people at the forefront of creating those policies without checking with the survivors, both male, female, and other genders, what their responses would be is not going to be sufficient. So lawmakers, policyholders, the organizers must put the survivors at the table when they are coming up with the law. That would be a really inclusive way to kind of first start off. Creating those kind of safety nets within a work structure, within the companies, within the organizations is the other way that this should actually function. So put them together, see what the responses are, take into account what responses do they want out of this whole thing, so that the laws and the things can be passed. The other thing is that both men, women, and on all kinds of, all other genders have to go through a personal transformation in this. They have to recognize that this is about themselves as well as about the collective, human race out there. So these are some of the things that we are still fighting against, and these are some of the things that we are working on to change. And for women, the fact that a woman is standing up to say that I was sexually harassed is a huge, huge statement, And for a woman who comes from a very vulnerable society, for a young girl who comes from a vulnerable society, it's even difficult for them to do that. They need all the support. They need all the kind of, propping up that is needed for that first statement to come through. And then I guess it's going to be easier.
I mean, India has had no lack of conversation in the past decade, and you've been a huge part of driving that. Rapes and deaths of women on buses, I mean, this is a national issue now. Are lawmakers doing what they ought to be?
The impunity is enormous, The wheels of law grind really slowly. Justice is really, even fast-track cases take 7 years, 4 years. The very famous, rape and death of paramedical, student in Delhi a few years ago took 4 years. It was a fast-track case. It had it had national, international attention. So there is impunity in the system, and people are aware of that. The other thing is that as more and more women are becoming visible, and I'm talking especially about India, more and more women become visible, more and more women take up public spaces, more and more women join the workforce, there is a huge backlash. And that backlash will continue for some time till we kind of balance it all out. That backlash has to be addressed.
Mónica, you're approaching and advancing the rights of women, some of whom are undocumented, who go through sexual assault, rape. What structures and strategies have you come up with? What do you feel like you still need in that special context?
So, a lot of the conversation around the response to the Me Too disclosures has been around the legal fixes that are required. And certainly when it comes to undocumented women in the United States, we have to talk about our broken immigration system and the fact that it is the vulnerable immigration status that perpetrators prey on. They tell people that they will report them if they come forward. So we have to look at that structure. But I also want to say that the law only works in so much as it is accessible to people. And that means that the other things that need to be put in place is resources so that people can do outreach to individuals about what their rights are. That means having proper training for people who are going to be working with undocumented people who are afraid and others who need additional support in some of the most difficult moments of their life. There are so many other things that need to be put in place beyond what the law offers or addressing the problems and the gaps that are in the law. Because I actually am a litigator and have litigated these cases on behalf of survivors, and I can tell you that in the days that these complaints are being filed and in the years that are leading up to bringing these cases, it's all the other kinds of care that is required that actually brings people to the day when they can see justice through a court system. So it's having the housing, it's knowing what their rights are, if they're facing retaliation because of their immigration status. It's knowing what to do if their children are also being threatened. It's all these other pieces. And so while I think it's important for us to talk about the law, it's also important for us to talk about all the other kinds of services that are required, not just for undocumented individuals, but for all victims and survivors who are coming forward. And that's part of the work that we do. We try to really look at the holistic picture and try to work with individuals who provide all kinds of services to support individuals who are coming forward.
And we've seen very innovative approaches to rights and codes of conduct within farm worker communities. You and I are both big fans of a film called Food Chains that looks at this, where even when there isn't necessarily the hand of the law, codes of conduct are created that make farm communities more accountable, even internally. How does that work, and do you think that has lessons, or has it already been adapted?
Sure, I think that looking at corporate social responsibility, particularly worker-led corporate social responsibility, that is definitely a new approach that more individuals are looking at. And
so this means the Walmarts and the buyers exerting pressure on these systems to
That's right, but in my opinion, it has to be multiple avenues to address these issues, because we have small farms as well that aren't going to necessarily be impacted in the same way by a code of conduct that is going to apply to a bigger employer. And so I think that as we think about the kind of work that needs to be done, it really does have to be a multi-pronged strategy that includes policy, corporate social responsibility, individual care and resources, as well as, ensuring that victims and survivors are provided with a menu of all the different kinds of services and relief that they have available to them, so that they can choose what is best for them. Because what might be good for one victim or survivor in terms of their choices and how to pursue justice might not be what someone else chooses. And I think it's really important as activists and as advocates that we are clear about that there isn't necessarily one way for people to seek justice or to try to move forward in their healing process. And to prescribe it or to say that this is the only avenue by bringing a lawsuit or what have you, I actually think that we run the risk of doing harm. And so I think that for all of us who are doing this work on the ground, it's knowing that there are multiple strategies that have to be employed, and the survivors and victims need to know what all their options are so that they can choose what's best for their lives.
It's really something to say that in many of these cases, the statute of limitations is passed, or prosecution isn't even possible, or fast tracks take 4 years. So even the strategies of what justice looks like, when there is no actual legal pathway. So before I ask you to just weigh in on the structures and the strategies you want to see come together for this to move forward, this is the time where, for those who don't know, I kind of have to let the cat out of the bag. I'm not just moderating the conversation, I'm kind of in it. I'm one of just over a dozen women who started a group called, when you talk about your own story, it feels different, you get a little more jittery. We started a group called Press Forward to create accountability and safety for women especially, but men and women, in newsrooms. We had all been assaulted or attacked by serial predators in our news organizations, in our news networks. We, in a cheeky way, refer to ourselves as alumni, because we don't feel like victims anymore. So we're sort of alumni of this creepy behavior in newsrooms. We came together as a group of a dozen co-founders to create Press Forward, launched at the National Press Club, and actually thanks to those sorts of alliances that you, Mónica, created with Time's Up, and they became inspired to also create these industry-level collaborations. So Press Forward is also Time's Up Press. It's sort of dual-labeled, dual-branded. And so just a couple of observations from that experience of coming forward to do that. A lot is talked about in terms of intersectionality and race.
Yeah.
To me, they're not even separate issues.
Yeah.
I admire so much the concept of intersectionality. For me, it's so holistic. There are shadow effects. My friends of color in the newsroom felt the same burn from levels of toxicity that should have never been there. Cultures of preference, cultures of abuse that should have never been there. And so I've seen how this impacts them even in the same moment, on top of things that they've gone through as women of color in news and in journalism. And so obviously, we've thought a lot about what this all means and how you create structural change, and why proximity matters is because everyone knows the tempo, I sometimes say the acupuncture of their own industry. So what it takes to actually create better norms and practices, we're talking to every network, and lovingly so. We're really focused on the way forward. We've also thought to ourselves, okay, there was a time when all of this was acceptable and nobody said anything, and even when folks knew, nothing was acted upon. Now we have swung to a place where out of fear, the response has been very quick. Well, where the pendulum lands depends on us. It's structural and it's strategic, and it's going to take a second. So we committed ourselves to doing a 6-month study. We haven't even said when the 6 months starts, so an extended 6 months. Well, we're still in learning mode. We'll say when we really, even the design of what you bring in.
Right.
You need inputs from women in local and national newsrooms. You need folks who've left the industry because of this toxicity, who often feel more comfortable, because guess what? Of the more than a dozen women in our group, only one still works in a general interest news organization. You know, people think that maybe Setrakian had a little more because, you know, guts because she works now in an independent context. But the truth is also, I think there's so much ageism and so much objectification of women tied into this that I think once you reach a certain age as a woman, you feel more bold. There's something about that. There's something about the vulnerability you feel when you're younger. And guess what? The statute of limitations was, I believe, 300 days in most of our cases, right? So there's something that both structural, emotive, interpersonal, and our perspective was we're going to take those 6 months and create a smart industry roadmap, pulling in, a lot of us are former management consultants, so we're creating an industry roadmap around what ought to change internally, externally, transversally. What does it mean when women in different organizations don't have a really good collective way? So many wonderful groups in our context, IWMF, Women's Media Center, who've been doing this. So what does it take for that to get pulled into everyone's forward vision for the way forward? A lot of forward here. So on that note, when you look forward, what are the structures and resources, what kind of mobilization do you want to see broadly, as your choice, within your context or sort of more holistically? Sohini, let's start with you and move our way down, and then we'll get to Q&A. I think by then it'll be time.
As I said before, including survivors' voices when you are creating the policies around sexual harassment. And what you said, that was one of the points that I wanted to make, is that creating those, keeping in mind the undocumented worker, keeping in mind the young artists trying to, make it through the system, keeping in mind the Dalit woman, working within the thing. Let us be intersectional in approaching those laws, in approaching this whole system. Teaching young boys and girls about consent early on is absolutely extremely important. We've seen, how is my no emphatic? Is my no very, am I saying no quietly? Am I meaning the no? All of these things can actually go either way, in treating a case. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about this openly. Let's set up tenets. Let's tell others, what is it about consent? And there's lots of, materials available to talk about it. And the third thing is that the women's movement with very little resources have really, helped us kind of come to this stage, where women across the world are standing up and saying, me too. For the next step, for building that sustainability, for building those kind of structures, there are need of resources. Where are those resources going to come from? That's the three things.
Do resources flow into this movement or not?
They're not. Yeah.
Structurally.
Yeah.
Amanda, what do you think?
So the United Nations General Assembly has never passed a comprehensive resolution that focuses on sexual violence. Sexual violence has always been a category of something else. So they've passed things like rape in context of war. Most rapes happen outside of war. Yes, that's right. They've passed things in the context of women and girls' rights, but they haven't passed a comprehensive one that includes men, children survivors, making survivors the center of it. And that's something that I definitely want to see happen. Around the world, there are basic rights. For instance, in some parts of the world, when a survivor is raped and becomes pregnant, she is forced out of the education system. So the rights that are included in our UNGA resolution include basic things like the right to education. That's one thing that I want to see change and I'm working on. The second is just equality under the law. In the United States, we want for justice to not depend on geography. that two survivors in two different states shouldn't have two completely sets of different rights. Because of just the American legal system, the federal law that I passed doesn't apply to most rape cases. It does impact 25 million people, but it impacts Native American survivors, survivors in the military, and so we have to actually pass these rights state by state, and so that's where most of the 14 laws come in. And then just for the theme of this conference, which is power to proximity, what I teach our organizers at RISE is, it's really corny, but I call it hopeonomics. That's our word for it. And it's really boiled down to the concept that hope is contagious. And that everything that we do, every right we pass, every conversation that we have, every survivor we empower to pen their own civil rights into existence, it impacts the community around them, and it creates these ripple effects that help inspire other survivors as well to come forward.
Yeah.
We see that with the Me Too movement, and we see that around the world.
It's energetic capital.
Exactly.
That's very interesting. Well, I'll say resources have not yet begun to flow into these spaces the way it's going to be required, and yet everyone is finding a way. Doesn't mean it should be that way, but it's really remarkable. I haven't seen any sign that anyone is sitting around waiting for that resource to show up.
Right.
And yet how much more can happen otherwise.
Yeah, I think to that point, people do what they need to do for their lives, whether or not there are resources that exist to support the work. And I think that, for us, looking forward, we have this incredible gift that has been given to us in that the women in the entertainment industry chose to use their platforms to give other individuals who didn't have access to those platforms to talk about what they were experiencing. People say, that farmworker women were silenced and farmworker women weren't speaking out before. No, farmworker women were. People weren't listening. But now what Time's Up has done is given our community an opportunity to use the megaphone that the entertainment industry has had, and now we can use it to talk about what solutions we think are required. And I think for us looking forward, it's on all of us in this room, and everyone watching, everyone outside of this room, to ensure that the truths that are being told are not forgotten, that we do something with and about this now that we have seen, we cannot unsee, and that we spread the message that it's not only in the workplace where sexual violence should not exist. Sexual violence should not exist in any place. And the way that we're going to achieve a violence-free world is by creating the tools that are needed for prevention, by encouraging upstanders, by making sure that the laws are in place that are strong enough to actually hold people accountable. In the United States, if you work in a place that has 15 workers or more, you're covered by the federal anti-discrimination laws. If you work in a place that has 14 workers or fewer, you're not covered. So what that means is that farm worker women who work on small farms, domestic workers, they're not covered by the law, even though they're among the most vulnerable workers in our nation. And we cannot have a situation where some lives are valued and some lives are not. And so we have to continue working hard together to ensure that all lives and all work are considered valuable and dignified. And I think that means doing what we can together to document the stories and to ensure that the survivors' perspective in terms of their expertise and what is needed to help them heal and what is needed for the law to really make people whole is taken into account, because that isn't always happening. And farm worker women have been very clear in our country in saying that they don't want people in rooms talking about them. They want to be in the rooms talking about themselves and what they need. And so for those of you who are holding conferences and having meetings, please bring in the voices of the women and men and children who are being impacted, because they hold the answers.
Absolutely.
And we have to listen.
Absolutely.
As someone who had the benefit of moving from media to technology, you would never design a tech platform without doing that user research and understanding the answer is there and actually needs to guide the structure, not have the structure imposed on them. I wrote in an op-ed for the Washington Post that for too long our network sort of pretended this all happened at Fox. But it's actually systemic, and no one gets to be on a high horse. So the structural change and the time it takes, I call that 6-month study a way to put more time on the shot clock. This needs to continue. This needs to be structural and extremely inclusive in how we all compare notes and grow from this. And I'm going to say it one more time because I feel it that emphatically. The component of race and the component of the minority experience is this conversation. It's not a subset, it is this. Fundamentally, do you treat people with dignity or not? Do you commoditize people or not? Do you diminish them or not? And anyone who experiences that is part of this. And I don't see the fixes moving anywhere good without all of that baked in. So with that, let's move into conversation with you who've been listening so nicely. Anyone want to start us off? And remember to introduce yourself.
I'm Katie Myler from More Than Me, and I wanted to ask Mónica, hi. Mónica,
Hi.
I'm Katie, everybody, hi. And you were talking a lot about what are the women coming forward to? And I was curious if you could talk more about that. What are you talking about when they come forward? What structures are there to protect them? Who's there to rehabilitate them? Do you have any thoughts on that, or where, like, resources for that? Because, you know, I work in Liberia with girls there, and I've seen that be, and I don't know where, you know, with the justice system is so weak. I mean, we had a rape at I run school systems. We have a school system. We had a rape in one of our schools, and these girls came forward, and we had, you know, luckily we have the funding to support them, but now we're working with public schools, and as this is happening, you know, we're hearing about it in public schools. The justice system doesn't have the money for it, and everyone tells these girls, there's campaigns everywhere, come forward, and I'm like, if they come forward, their lives are in danger, and they get excommunicated from, so I'd love to hear.
Thank you for that question. So as we think about this question, it's not just the laws and the legal systems that exist and sort of what is the justice system that people are coming forward to, because we know those processes are lengthy and not everyone even can access them. In terms, for our community, people don't even necessarily know what state they're living in, let alone how to get to the office where they have to make a complaint, right? Or they don't have access to their own phone to be able to call and make a complaint. So, you know, for us, it's about, as people are coming forward to tell their stories, what's next? Are there social services in place? Are there mental health resources available so that people can, once they've disclosed, get the support that they need to work through it? You know, one of my concerns after we started seeing all the disclosures was, okay, so people are talking about it now, but do we have resources available to plug people in? Are we providing the hotline number for people to be able to call? The week after our letter was published in Time magazine, I started fielding suicide calls from farm worker women because this mass disclosure was traumatic. And for them, there was nowhere to go, right? They didn't have the transportation to get to the place where they could get mental health if it existed. And so we need to make sure that there is mental health care in place. We need to make sure that doctors who are going to be seeing patients understand that when people are complaining about headaches or tension at work, that they're not necessarily just talking about random stress. There might be something more behind that. So how are we educating people about how to do the intake that is going to be able to determine whether there's something more there? You know, if people are going to come forward to make a criminal complaint, are there victim advocates that are going to be there to help them through that process? If someone needs to be relocated because it's no longer safe for them to live where they're living because the perpetrator knows, or because in the case of farm worker women, they're living in company provided housing, is there a process in place to help them relocate? So as we think about this, we're thinking about all the different pieces, the legal, the social services, the health, the mental health, you know, and it extends to families and children. So part of the work that we do is safety planning. We actually created a safety plan for farm worker women and their families so that as farm worker women are coming forward to disclose, there's a whole checklist of questions that we've created for use by other advocates so that they will be able to work with women to say, okay, you know, what is your code going to be if you have to make a quick exit? Or do you have a phone? Do you know how to use a phone? You know, things of this nature. So we've come up with some pretty extensive tools that we use in our community as we do education. And because we're not on the ground every place. We have members who are around the country, but I myself am physically in Washington, D.C., and so it's important for us as we're creating the training materials and the training tools that we're teaching promotoras, that we're teaching women in the communities about how to do their own trainings with those materials that we're creating so that it can then ripple out that way. In the tradition of the farm worker movement in the United States, having house meetings is very common. So not necessarily having big training sessions in conference rooms, if it's more like 5 or 6 people meeting together, and our job is to make sure that people who are associated with our organization are trained in how to use the various tools so that when they're meeting with people, they can use those tools and teach them in community. But it's got to be all of those pieces, in my opinion, because we don't exactly know what different survivors are going to need. And we also don't know how long, in our case, how long it's going to take for the investigation to happen within the company or within the federal agency that investigates these cases, or even the lawsuits. I had one of my complaints that I filed with the federal agency, it was stuck for 3 years. That was before we even got to the point of litigating the case. And so during all that time, while investigations are happening or potential prosecutions are taking place, people need to be able to live their lives, and they need all these other resources to be able to do that.
As I listened to you, a couple things, gosh, that's a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of work.
But you're doing it.
We're doing it.
So you can pick up, obviously, on those tools, and those seem highly transferable in so many ways.
Yes.
But also, when you think of all the work that's to be done, it's like, well, do we want another wave of women to go through this? Question 1. Question 2, do we want the women who've gone through it to have the chance to heal? And if we do, then we kind of have no choice but to look straight on into the project management cycle that is required to make that whole integrated approach accessible to the girls in Liberia. Okay, let's start here and then we'll move over there. ARC.
Thank you. I'm Gisela Porras from Panama. I work for Vital Voices, and I run a program educating teen mothers. My question, Sohini, is what about, I hear you talking about consent, kids understanding about that, but then that makes me think about forced marriages. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are you doing? What's happening?
So we work on early marriage in India. We've been working for the last 4 years. And what we've seen that...
How early? What does that look like?
So, earlier when we started working, it was 13, 14. It's gone up now. It's 15 to 18. But, sometimes parents would just wait for 5, 6 months for a child to turn from 17 and a half to 18 and get her married. Well, we know that physically and mentally it's not, so 18 is the legal age, but, So yes, there has been statistics that child marriage has come down significantly in the areas where we work and in the country as such. But child marriage is deeply rooted in patriarchal norms in the country. And so even if everybody knows about the law, the parents, the whole system, everybody knows about the law and the legal things. Yeah? Yeah, there's a law, and everybody knows about it, and they will tell you, if you meet them, 18 is the legal age of marriage. It is so deeply rooted in patriarchal norms that parents would, automatically, veer towards getting their child married before they reach that age. The 2-3 things. One is that, first of all, education. First of all, the value for girls in our society is very less. So, there is a strong son preference in the country, and, what girls do as human beings is not really that much, valued. Second of all, when girls reach puberty, there is always this whole fear of, sexual violence and assault and safety on the way to school. Secondary schools are far away from your home, so, the best way is to take them off schools, make them sit at home, get them married. And the third thing is that what is an option for a girl then sitting at home? What does she look like? Is there vocational training available? Is there some jobs available? Is there livelihood available? So, we look at this entire gamut of things, and, there are many organizations focusing on livelihood, many organizations focusing on education. We are focusing on actually transforming those deep-rooted patriarchal values. Mm-hmm. The way we work is we work with the individual girl and the boy and everybody in the system, but we are trying to create an ecosystem approach where the rest of the community understands this and supports, because it's not enough for a 15-year-old girl to stand up and say, I'm not going to get married, until and unless her family, her community, the village elders also say, okay, we hear your voice, and we will let you go. We work with about 400,000 adolescents in India through a gender transformative curriculum in school and in community, 11 to 14, 15 to 18, trying to actually do this. And our constant endeavor is go back to the community and connect these individual voices to the community through our media, through our community mobilization, through our trainings, and through our individual human touch programs. So it's a lot. We see, and it's very slow to shift, so you have to be really patient. And somebody said, oh, what kind of outcomes are you promising us in 6 years' time? I said, nothing, It's very difficult to promise, that girls are going to stay off school and delay age of marriage in six years' time. We can, however, we have indicators which increases girls' mobility, which, helps them, have another sibling help with the domestic chores who's a boy. Those are the intermediate indicators we can promise. We cannot have gender transformation happen in 6 years' time. So it's a slow process, but we see the shift happening slowly.
It's like the computing process, the parallel processing. Everything moves forward in parallel, and then the results hopefully all plug in.
Yeah.
The gentleman right here in the front.
Blue.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm Thane Kreiner from Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship. And Mónica, you mentioned that the problem of sexual harassment and assault pervades many industries and sectors. And I'm sorry to say that last December I learned that social entrepreneurship and impact investing are not exempt. Speaking of proximity, I found out that one of my students was assaulted and then a couple years later harassed at one of the major conferences in our ecosystem. And subsequent to that, we've kind of apprenticed the problem and worked with people like Ayla to come up with the ways of working that we want our social entrepreneurs, our mentors, our staff, our students, everybody to acknowledge, as we all did in coming here to Skoll World Forum. And so my question, which is an uncomfortable question, is how in Beyond Me Too do we balance zero tolerance and restorative justice?
Interesting question. I have wondered whether we need to look actually at transitional justice models from post-conflict countries to import into this. Because, restorative justice, I'd love to have that. Anyone who doesn't get their question, and I will hold these wonderful women back afterwards in the hallway. We can talk about what justice looks like. But does anybody want to quickly weigh in on that? So,
I can say something brief. So I often talk about the fact that we have to be cognizant of the fact that victims and perpetrators move, right? So if a perpetrator is fired from one job, the perpetrator is going to go somewhere else to work, right? And similarly, victims and survivors will move and will need different services no matter where they are. And so as we think about care and as we think about accountability, we have to take that into account. And I think that we as a society have to focus more on prevention and culture shift and making sure that people understand that the old way of doing things, that's the old way of doing things, and it's no longer going to be tolerated. And there has to be, in my opinion, there have to be courses for perpetrators. I think that in other contexts we have trainings, we have courses, we have other things in which people are getting rehabilitative care when they have committed a crime, what have you. We need that too in this context. Is that going to solve the problem? No, I think we need people to be held accountable, whether that means they get fired from a job or whether that means they go to jail because of a crime they've committed. I think it has to be all of those things together. But I don't think the solution is just let's fire everyone and think that that's going to solve things, because the reality is that person is going to go get another job, and we have to ask ourselves, have we done what we need to do in order to ensure that that person doesn't do this again? And I don't think that we are there yet.
I can tell you from my industry that the not famous cases of abusers are not getting picked up in the press. If they're not big famous names anymore, they're not written about, which means folks get quietly punished or slapped on the wrist. But the women that man affected, in this case it was women, who are now a diaspora scattered throughout the world, have no idea he was ever caught. They don't know that anyone else even spoke up. So that moment that some of us got to have because we're aligned with famous cases, that's not even a healing process that scores of women have had a chance to experience. Anything you guys want to add to that before we...
And you know, it's just not enough to have a zero tolerance policy. You have to articulate that. What does that mean? You know, what are the steps that will be taken? You have to come out with it. You have to talk about it. You have to tell people that this is what you're coming to a conference. Bring, you're going to take water bottles. We are not going to use plastic water bottles. We are not going to use paper. We are not going to use PowerPoint presentations. We are going to have a zero tolerance policy for any sexual misconduct. It has to be written down and it has to be stated clearly
And enforced.
When a lot of capital is deployed and controlled by men, and women have trouble statistically accessing capital, the potential for abuse of power needs to be acknowledged.
I just want to reiterate that it's so important to believe survivors. I know that you and others who are in this room proactively care about it, but outside of this room, so many people who don't have power, who don't have platforms, are scared to come forward. There are so many people who didn't write Me Too, and it's because they didn't have access to resources, or they still face a very real chance of retaliation. And when we are talking about codes of conduct or what kind of systems we want to reform, just know that being proactive and believing survivors is so incredibly important.
Malika, let's end with you. We've got time for one last question.
Thank you. I think like many of the women who've been part of the global women's movement in pushing us to this moment of Me Too, there's this enormous sense of relief that this moment has arrived. I mean, it's like I can feel it in my body sometimes, even as it's traumatic to be listening to all of these stories, that there's another part of me that's like, oh my God, thank God. And even as that feeling of relief is happening, we all know that what's being revealed is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's happening in the workplace doesn't even come close to the most proximate of places, which is our homes. And that's one of the things about even the theme of Skoll, where we talk about proximity leading to empathy and change. Well, for women, the proximity of the home is often the most unsafe space. So when we start thinking about the enormity of the violence that we're dealing with, from home to workplace to educational institutions to social entrepreneur spaces to public spaces to governments, I wonder whether we might get strategic about the Me Too moment to think about all of the things that have been articulated so well by all of you on the panel, but also to think about what are other inflection points that we could be strategically leveraging for greater systems shift to happen. Is this a moment for some of us, perhaps, to really be sitting down with male leaders and saying, it's time for you to show up. And it's time for you to show up in these kinds of ways. And these are the things that we need you to do, which is beyond even just zero tolerance policy in the workplace. Is this a time for us to think strategically about accountability outside of a criminal justice system that is deeply flawed and broken, not just in the United States? We heard from Brian on day one. So more laws and more policies and more accountability for women has always been on this paradox of, as women of color, I mean, certainly having been part of the domestic violence movement in the US for so long, the criminal justice system doesn't work in India either. So how much time and energy do we spend into trying to fix a broken criminal justice system to work for us in this instance, versus think about different forms of accountability and get really creative about restorative justice and accountability in different ways? And then the third thing that I will say, the number of stories that I have heard from men and boys about the violence that they have experienced in their lives is enormous. We live in a patriarchal structure that privileges certain groups of people over certain groups of people. And that privileging happens on the basis of gender, race, class, sexuality, ethnicity. And if we take an intersectional analysis, we understand that it also happens at the personal level, the interpersonal level, the community level, the structural level, right? So it's a very complex grid of harm, of broken people. Again, to quote Brian, we live in a world of broken people because we live in a patriarchal system that breaks people in order to endure. Where can we inject that conversation into this incredible moment of shift to start imagining other paradigms of how we live on this planet? And can we hold this moment of accountability, trauma, healing, with really the enormity of what needs to shift, with the opportunity that this moment of collapse of everything around us also gives us. Because everything is falling apart as well, right? I mean, all of that is happening simultaneously. So I just wanted to inject some of those thoughts into this conversation, because in this moment of relief, I can think, oh my God, this is the moment to get the $1 trillion fund or the quadruple $1 trillion fund to really make it possible for women to heal and thrive and get accountability. Sorry. And we could be thinking about what else do we need to be creating to create the world we want.
Sure. I just want to say something that I think needs to be said. You know, Tarana Burke brought us to where we are right now in this conversation, and Tarana Burke's work continues. The Me Too movement did not end in October when people started disclosing, and she has a vision for the way forward. And her vision for the way forward is about addressing violence along the spectrum. Tarana Burke's work was not focused on workplace sexual violence, although that's really where the conversation is centered. So on behalf of my sister who's not in this room, please let us not forget her work, her vision, and her leadership. And we need to listen to her and where she thinks that we need to go. And then we need to have this conversation globally, and we need to have this conversation continuously.
So it starts and ends with that today. I will spend every minute we have in Oxford creating space to continue this conversation. As you notice, I didn't cut anyone off because at this point in my life, I believe in people going long. You get somewhere further when that happens. So thank you so much for being part of this. I apologize if we didn't get to your questions, but again, we will continue this. If you're outside this room, you can tweet me at Lara, L-A-R-A. I was early. And we will factor that in and tweet you back. Okay, thank you.